We continue reading the introduction of Rabbi Yosef Karo to his book Beth Yosef. Yesterday we spoke about his method of deciding the halacha. He said that the problem was that when he comes to determine the halacha and he looks at all the different opinions which preceded him, he admits that it's very difficult because for each law, for each halacha that is presented, there are many arguments, and many different arguments, and how can you logically determine which argument is more valid than the other? It says, right? If we're going to settle the disputes by using the Talmudic methodology and by presenting arguments and proofs, that has already been done for hundreds of years. That's what they were doing, and each one presented proofs and arguments and rationales for his approach. He says that Tosafot v'Hidushei Ramban v'Rashba v'Aran v'Azal meleim ta'anot rayot lekol echad me'adeot. He says already before him he quotes names of four generations. The Tosafot, who were the grandchildren of Rashi, lived in the 12th century. Ramban in the 13th century. Rabbi Moshe ben Nahman, who was from Gerona in Spain and combined the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic approach. Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, who was the student of Ramban, is from the passage of the 13th, 14th century, and Aran, Rabbeinu Nisim, also from Gerona. No, Sfarad, Spain, Castilla.
I was in the museum.
Yeah, no, not Castilla, sorry, Sevilla.
I was in the museum of Ramban in Barcelona.
Gerona, right. So it's called Girondi, but Gerona. So,
I was there.
So all these books are meleim ta'anot urayot lekol echad me'adeot. They are full with the argument and proofs for each one of them. ומי זה אשר יערב ליבו לגשת להוסיף טענות urayot? And who is going to get to approach this pile of arguments and add more arguments or more proofs? Or on the other hand, it says ezeu asher yimla'eu libo להכניס ראשו בין ההרים הררי אל. So this is uses an analogy mentioned in the Talmud that why should I put my head between two mountains? Meaning when two great authorities, two scholars argue, if you enter this argument, you're going to lose. You don't want to get involved. It's as if there's an earthquake and two mountains are falling on each other, and you're going to go get crushed in the middle. So this is what we cannot do that. And he says, not only we don't have the, maybe we're lacking the intelligence to do that, אלא אפילו היה אפשר לנו לדרוך דרך זה, לא היה ראוי להחזיק בה לפי שדרך ארוכה ביותר. Even if we could have done that, we should not do it because this is going to be extremely prolonged and protracted. Because he says already we have a literature that has thousands of books and pages, each present the argument. So now I'm going to another book. What I'm going to do? What are we going to do with that? Now you'll have to learn all the other thousands of books and this book as well. לכן הסכמתי בדעתי כי להיות שלושת עמודי ההוראה שרבה את בית ישראל נשען עליהם בהוראותיהם הלוא הם העריף והרמב"ם והראש. He says, so I decided the following. There are three pillars, he calls them the pillars of hora'ah, pillars of halakha. Three major halachic authorities on which the Jewish people relies when deciding halakha. Who are they? Harif, Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, Rambam, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, Ve'arosh, Rabbeinu Asher. So he says, I will, in every halakha, I will look up the opinions of those three people. Rif, Rambam, Rosh, Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, Maimonides, and Rabbeinu Asher. And you realize that the Rif is from Spain and North Africa, born in both, and Rambam also Spain, North Africa, and Rabbeinu Asher was born in Germany and came to Spain. So it seems like the tendency of Rabbi Yosef Karo would be to go with the Sephardic halakha. So I said, אמרתי ליבי שבמקום ששניים מהם מסכימים לדעת אחת, נפסוק הלכה כמותם. So it seems a very simple solution. I will look up those three rabbis and whenever in every case which both of them agree on what, I'll follow the simple rule of majority. 2 versus 1, very simple. The problem with that is that if you really go with the logical assumptions, you could argue that maybe their agreement is not systematic across the whole world of halakha, meaning they could have been in agreement on one topic, but their agreement on another topic could be contradictory. So if you always follow the rule of majority, let's say you have 3 rabbis, they call them 1, 2, 3, right? So let's say that on an issue of Shabbat, Rabbi 1 and 3 are together, so you follow the halakha. On the issue of Pesach, Rabbis 1 and 2 are together, and you follow the halakha. So, but if you compare the 2 halachot to each other, you'll see that you can't rule the same rabbi that you relied on, which appears in both cases, which is Rabbi number 1, would disagree with himself. Basically, you get into a contradiction. So this is a problem with this methodology. But anyway, he says that. But even with that, there are exceptions. אם לא, במקצת מקומות, שכל חכמי ישראל, או רובם, חולקים על הדעת, ולכן פשט המנהג בהפך. Says, but there will be exceptions where all other rabbis, he will follow them. He will, let's say, he determined by majority, this is what you do. Then he looks at the other rabbis and says that most of the rabbis do not agree with that verdict, and either all or most. Velachem pashat minhag be'efech, and therefore the minhag is now the opposite. So even though by the rule of majority he arrives at the conclusion that one thing should be done, because the practice is the opposite, he will go against it. And that's not the only exception. There's another exception. What happens if of those 3 opinions, of those 3 rabbis, only 2 express their opinion on that matter? So we don't have a majority. There's only 1 versus 1. It's balanced. So, and on the other hand, you have 2 rabbis who you have 1 who represents each opinion. הנה הרמב"ן והרשב"א והר"ן והמרדכי וסמ"ג ז"ל לפנינו. Okay, then I could rely on the following book: Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, that I mentioned before, Rabbeinu Nisim of Chelona, the Mordechai, and the Smag Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, which was written by Rabbi Moshe of Kuzi in France. And then he says, I will weigh all their opinions together. Now, already here you see that in terms of the schools of thought or schools of halakha that they represent, he opened it up to the broader Jewish world. He's not presenting a Sephardic halakha book. It's maybe tilted a little bit toward the Sephardic world, but it combines both Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Already in the list that he mentioned before, remember the 30 books, the names I read yesterday, if you look at their origin, only 9 of them are identified directly with Sepharad, and 21 more with Ashkenaz or Italy. And on top of that, he says that Biktzat Mekomot Ma'amarei HaZohar, he also incorporated into his halakha a lot of elements from the Zohar. So he appeals to a very very broad population, to the Ashkenazim, to the Jews of Italy, to the Jews of the Byzantine Empire that became later on under the Ottoman Empire, this is like in Greece and the Balkans, and to the Kabbalists who are already following some traditions of the Zohar. And even when he decides the final verdict, the final halakha, he relies on Ramban, Rashba, Veran, that are all from Spain, and Cherona, but are influenced by the Ashkenazi schools. Mordechai is one of the students of Rabbeinu Asher, who lived in Germany, and Smag, Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, is also one of the rabbis of French that represents the Ashkenazi tradition. So Rabbi Yosef Karo basically creates a system with exceptions, and rabbis will argue later on that this is an arbitrary system, that what he did is not a system which is coherent, that all its components go together and that there is one line that directs the system from the beginning to end, but rather it's on a case-by-case basis. Each case that comes, each halakha, you count the number of opinions, you say, this is what we do, move on. Now, it could be that once you put the horses together, there will be contradiction. Yes, there will be contradictions. So is it good or not? The other rabbi said that this is not good. This is not a system that you could rely on. But I believe that Rabbi Yosef Karo did this deliberately. He knew that there are going to be contradictions, but he wanted to create a system that everybody could refer to. As I mentioned before, he didn't want people to follow the law of the Shulchan Aruch, but rather to follow a law that is found or based on the Shulchan Aruch, meaning they could find their opinion there. So once there is contradiction, even an inner contradiction, one could say, I follow this side and not that side. And it's in the Shulchan Aruch. Now there's another exception. So already he mentioned two exceptions. One, if the practice in the field does not agree with his decision of halakha, he will go with the practice. If only two rabbis opined and not all three of them, he will use other books to gather information from. What if none of them spoke about that? Could be a new tradition, or for some reason a case that never occurred to them. We'll rule like the leading scholars who did address this issue. He says, and this road is the highway. It used to be called King's Road. You know that there's still places in America named after the old country where you have King's Highway or King's Road. It meant because it's an imperial road. It's the clear way that you can travel on safely. So he says this is the highway. He doesn't say it's perfect. He says it's the most logical one to remove the obstacle and the impediments of not being able to learn halakha. Here's another exception. It says ve'im biktsat aratzot nahagu isur biktsat dvarim af al pi she'anachnu nachri'a be'efech yahaziku b'minhagam ki kvar kiblu aleim divrei hacham ha'oser v'asur lahem linhog heter. He says, but if I will say that something is permissible and some communities have a tradition that it is forbidden, they should keep their practice because they have already accepted the prohibition and they cannot change it to be to permit it. He doesn't mention the opposite case. What if they used to think it's mutar and now he says it's asur? Can they change to that? He doesn't say it, and that is part of his where he leaves room for flexibility. It's up to them. First of all, he removes the danger of clashing with other communities and other rabbis by forcing them to change something from asur to mutar, from forbidden to permitted, because this could create a lot of problems. But even when it's from mutar to asur, he doesn't impose it on them. He sort of leaves it open, meaning that he would prefer them to make this thing forbidden, but if they don't, it's okay. One example where he made something forbidden and the other rabbis disagreed, but now it has been established, is the prohibition of not getting married during the Omer. The prohibition against having weddings from Pesach to Lag BaOmer, or any time during the Omer, according to Ashkenazim, except for Lag BaOmer, was not a Sephardic custom. The Rabbi Yosef Karo was the first one who made it into halakha, and it was criticized right away by many Sephardic rabbis. His main opponents were Rabbi Hizkiah da Silva, who wrote a book called Pri Hadash, and this book was so critical of the Beth Yosef that after about 100 years, when the Shulchan Aruch became popular, the printers censored the book. They took out. I mean, you can't get the original book because most of his attacks and arguments against the Rabbi Yosef Karo were removed. But in any case, this is the general outline, how the Rabbi Yosef Karo presents his system. He says, "I'm going to first here's a couple of stages. So the first stage was on the Bet Yosef, the Arba'at Turim, which was the anthology of Rabbi Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher. He opened up all the sources and he explained them, and he also explained why there is a dispute or disagreement and how the rabbis derive their different opinions from the same original text. And he added to that the current, he updated with current halachic discussions. Then he moved to the next task, which was to write the Shulchan Aruch. Literally means the set table. The Shulchan Aruch for him is a set table. What is the image or the symbolism of a set table? When you say that the table is set, that means that you can come and eat. You don't have to do anything. Right? Dinner is ready. That's what Shulchan Aruch, when he says I set the table, he says all you have to do now is come and eat. You don't have to work too hard. In a sense, it's like what Rambam says. Rambam said, between the Torah and my book, you don't need any other book. Everything is easily accessible. But the secret of Rabbi Yosef Karo, he says, even though he said now the table is set, right? But he also gave you all the background that if you want to go into, if you decide to, no, I want to cook everything from scratch, then you could do it. Or better, there are some, I think Krispy Kremes did that. You could see the production line of right? And now other restaurants picked up on that. You want to see what happens behind the scenes. Rambam was like, okay, go eat it. You said, what went into that? How did you make it? Don't worry, just eat it, it's good. People say, okay, I don't know, I will take it with it. But when you see the whole production, you say, okay, I know it's kosher, I know it's good. So this is what the Shulchan Aruch says. Now, later on, and that will be interesting, later on, other rabbis came and said, you can't learn the Shulchan Aruch, it's so complicated. It's not meant for the masses. We have to write commentaries on that. Immediately after the book was published, commentaries upon commentaries, there's literature, hundreds, if not thousands of books on the Shulchan Aruch. He was very organized, so he took the chapters of the Arba'at Turim, which were one long unit, and he broke them down into what he called Siman and Saif, sub-entry, the entries and the sub-entries, so it's easy to navigate the Shulchan Aruch. And he also wrote indexes, which was not common at the time. He wrote an index, what's in every, what's the content of every entry of every chapter, and then at the end you could look at the end and easily find. So he made it really accessible. Another reason for the great success of the Shulchan Aruch and why it became widespread right away, beside his systematic approach of writing first expensive commentaries and then crystallizing them and giving them in a brief manner, he was also we call today tech savvy. He used the new technology. The new technology of his time was the printing press. What was the books that were printed before the printing press? They're called inconabula. They had to set it after you print several copies. The original plates are gone, and that's it. But with the new technology, you could print hundreds and thousands of copies by using one plate. So that made it easy for the book to spread. And he was very meticulous. Rabbi Yosef Karo traveled to Livorno in Italy several times to make sure that the book is printed correctly, and he managed to edit it and publish, I think, 3 editions in his life. Some people also say that the reason that Shulchan Aruch was accepted widely was that all the rabbis of the region accepted his authority right away. This is not true. This is sort of a legend that has been like what we call urban myth that has been recycled, and told over and over again without anyone knowing the origin of the halakha. It was first quoted later on by the Hida, Rabbi Haim David Azulai, lived in the 17th century, and he says, Maran, we call him Rabbi Yosef Karo Maran, our master. Why? Because this is the acronym from Mimatayim Rabbanim Nismach. He was ordained by 200 rabbis, but we don't know the names of those rabbis. There's no source for that. And we'll talk about the opposition to the Bet Yosef, to Shulchan Aruch. One of the main arguments that is presented by the leading rabbis of Morocco, mainly Rabbi David Shlush, and Rabbi Yosef Meshash, is that Rabbi Yosef Karo was not the leading authority in Eretz Israel. He was a great scholar, but he was not the leading authority in Eretz Israel at the time, and most other rabbis disagreed with him. So it was a combination of an opportune time when he published the book, using technology, and of course his system, which was very was welcomed within the literature that existed. Finally, I just say that he says ותועלת ספר זה לחכמים מבואר ולבוחרים בקיצור זה היא דרך ארוכה וקצרה. It says, so but this is his introduction to Bet Yosef. We'll also look later on in his introduction to Shulchan Aruch. But the way he saw the Shulchan Aruch, again, this is the name that we always hear when people talk about halakha. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? Do you follow the Shulchan Aruch? He said the Shulchan Aruch should be an easy book for everyone. He says the scholars could go deeper, but the layman could read it. In his mind, he says you could finish it once a month. You could divide that. And if you look, I have a volume of the Shulchan Aruch over there, all in one volume. It's about 300 pages. The summary. So you could, if someone is a serious student would read 10 pages a day, he can really review the whole Shulchan Aruch 10 or 12 times a year. But of course, with all the commentaries, it became almost impossible. So we'll talk more about Shulchan Aruch tomorrow. Baruch Adonai, La'olam, Amen ve'amen.